Israel. This is Lowell Joseph Gallen, founder of the Root and Branch Association, established in New York State in God of Israel Bless America in 1981, now celebrating our 40th anniversary. I would like to welcome our viewers and listeners worldwide and our live Zoom studio audience to this evening's program in our Root and Branch Association Limited English Language Conference and Lecture Series broadcasting from Jerusalem, Israel, and now celebrating the start of our second quarter century. As I always do at the beginning of each program, I thank the wonderful organization and several friends there who made possible our first quarter century from January 1995 until December 2020. The Orthodox Union Israel Center, 22 Karen Hayesod Street, provided us a welcome home to start our little lecture series, which grew and now is on our second quarter century. It's wonderful educational director emeritus and founder and editor emeritus of the unique Torah Tidbits publication, Mr. Phil Chernovsky, his Eshet Chayil, woman of valor, Mrs. Tony Chernovsky, and the long-suffering Mrs. Itter Rachel Rusek, the scheduler who keeps the whole place functioning. I don't know how she does it without having a nervous breakdown. I would have been carried out a long time ago. So thanks to all of you for those wonderful years we had together. Now we do our programming through Zoom. But now that the green pass, that actually I call it the obscene pass, is gone, we may return from time to time to do things in person, but I got used to doing things in my kitchen right here. So today is Tuesday, June 8th, 2021 in the Gregorian calendar and the 28th day of Sivan 5781 in the Hebrew Israelite calendar. We always like to give historical context, what happened in these days. We don't forget that on May 19th, 1943, not that long ago, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising came to an end. On June 5th, 1967 was the first day of the Six-Day War, where by God's grace, within a few hours, we miraculously destroyed most of the Egyptian Air Force on the ground. And on June 6, 1944, American and British and Allied forces invaded Nazi-occupied Germany in Normandy and Omaha and other beaches. So we remember them. Because of them, we could be here today. We are broadcasting from the land of Israel, city of God, Jerusalem, hill of the priests, Givat Chananya Abu Tur, overlooking Mount Moriah, where we believe that the third and final Israelite temple of Jerusalem will soon be under reconstruction and stand forever, as per the prophet Ezekiel's vision. Please see the biblical book of Ezekiel, chapters 40 through 48. The Root and Branch Association Limited promotes faith in the God of Israel who created us all, for the nations to honor and observe God's Noahide covenant and laws, and for all to honor God's land, Torah, and people covenants with his chosen people, Israel, and with the caveat, time's up, you have to do it now. That's it. So that is what we represent. Now, our speaker for this evening's program is a very courageous young man. I mean, young from my perspective. I just turned 65 years young on April 29th, which also was Lag BaOmer. And when they intersected was exactly when the Meron mass murder, you heard me right, took place. 1 a.m. in the morning on Friday, April 30th, which was actually a few hours into the beginning of Lag BaOmer, some birthday party. So Rabbi Chananya Weissman will be lead chairing, hosting, and speaking at our monthly medical war crimes seminar. Medical war crimes, Amalek, his nature and methods, and the Erev Rab. Now to introduce Rabbi Weissman, I now give the floor to my colleague, friend, Dr. Dentist Les Glassman. If you need a root canal or a crown, go see Les and Geula. And Les, now it's all yours.
Wow, Lowell, thank you so much. It really is an honor and a privilege. Rabbi Chananya Weissman, we actually met at the OU. It was an incredibly well-attended and very, very popular, and it was an outstanding event where you, I think you premiered your movie, but we saw your movie on Single Jewish Male, a documentary, and it was so well received. I remember it so well. There were a question and answer afterwards with live discussion, with people making wonderful suggestions. So I remember that, and it was really a very, very successful event. But I'm just going to give you just for our viewers out there, a little bit of an introduction who our esteemed guest speaker is this today. So Rav Chananya Weissman is the author of 7 books, including Go Up Like a Wall, In the Madness, Guide to the Shidduch World, Kesa Chananya, and Tovim Hashnayim, The Role of Nature of Man and Woman. Now, Chananya lives in Jerusalem. He's the author of hundreds of articles, maybe even thousands, and Divrei Torah on the Shidduch world, Israel, Aliyah, the redemption process that we are all experiencing now. And you can go to chananyaweissman.com. Chananya is a director and producer, and as I mentioned before, of this very successful Single Jewish Male documentary on the Shidduch world, and the Shidduch Chronicles, a series of short comedy films. Chananya made Aliyah 13 years ago. He got smicha from New York University, Yeshiva University in New York, and 13 years ago made Aliyah. And it really is such an honor and a privilege to have you here today. So without any further ado, our esteemed speaker, Rav Chananya Weissman.
Hey, thank you very much, Lowell and Les and everybody at the Root and Branch Association for making this possible. I am not the author of thousands of articles. I'll have to live a very, very long time to be the author of thousands of articles. Hopefully, the redemption process will be complete by then. And I just want to echo what Lowell said. It was, in fact, a mass murder. There's no question about it. Many years ago, after I made Aliyah, shortly after I made Aliyah, probably about 10 years ago, I was asked to give a short Dvar Torah in a shul in Katamon on Shabbos morning, just a very brief Dvar Torah before Musaf, and it was Parsha Zohar that week. So I spoke about the mitzvah of wiping out Amalek, and I didn't say anything very radical. I didn't say anything very bloodthirsty or violent. I simply gave an overview about the nation of Amalek and the importance to this very day that it's a mitzvah like any other mitzvah in the Torah to wipe out Amalek. And after I spoke, the person who invited me, who's a good friend of mine, told me that he received a lot of negative feedback. It's an Orthodox shul, of course. People were extremely offended. They asked that I never be invited to speak again in the shul because, you know, this mitzvah of wiping out Amalek is very offensive. Jews don't do such a thing. You know, this is something the Goyim do to us or did to us. This is not something that we do. Wiping out a nation, genocide. They were very shocked and offended. And of course, it's completely absurd because this is just a mitzvah in the Torah like any other mitzvah. And if people are uncomfortable doing a mitzvah, the problem is with them, not with the mitzvah. They need to learn more about the mitzvah, and they need to alter their perceptions and their beliefs to reconcile with the mitzvah, as opposed to altering the Torah to reconcile with their biases, which is unfortunately what most people do. If we have a problem with something the Torah says, the problem is with us, and we're the ones who need to change. We don't change the Torah to suit our preferences. Now, Amalek is a real nation, contrary to what is a fashionable view among many Jews today, even in the Orthodox world. Unfortunately, this is one of our great failings. They believe that Amalek is simply a concept, or it's not relevant anymore, or it's not something that we need to think about. It's just a mitzvah that's floating around in the air, and we read about it, and we make noise on Purim when we say Haman's name. But Amalek isn't something real and practical and relevant that we need to think about, let alone take any action towards fulfilling this mitzvah. Now, this is heresy on a certain level. Maybe it's unintentional heresy because of ignorance, but it's absolute heresy to say that a mitzvah in the Torah is not practical anymore, or not relevant anymore, or it used to be relevant and now it's not relevant anymore. There's no such thing. The Torah speaks a great deal, certainly in the Navi, about Amalek. Amalek is a real nation. They still exist. And even if we can't identify them necessarily, we can't point to a particular person and say with absolute certainty that that person came from Amalek, although we can certainly make very good guesses about that. Somebody asked me by email if Klaus Schwab is Amalek. And again, I can't take a DNA test and know for sure, but I wouldn't bet against it. I mean, if he isn't Amalek, I don't know who is. Somebody who is a mastermind between all of the problems and murder that's going on in the world. If he's not Amalek, I don't know who is. So Amalek is a real nation. Now we know that Sancheiriv, back in the times of the first base Hamitosh, mixed up many of the nations. He conquered many lands, and one of his strategies was to make sure that people did not rebel against him after he conquered their lands, was he would move populations out of their native lands, mixed up all the nations, so nobody really felt an attachment to any particular nation or land anymore. They were merely his servants. And Amalek as well got mixed up with everybody else. So we don't know who Amalek is anymore. Because of that, people think that they're not really a nation. They don't really exist anymore. Maybe there's one or two of them running around, but they're not really relevant. And that's not true. Just as the Jewish people were scattered among the nations, and we managed to retain our identity and our character. Now, it's true that because we have a Torah that binds us all together, it's easier for us to do that. But nevertheless, the Jews were scattered all over the world, and we still are a nation with, real properties and real characters. So is Amalek, and so are all of the 70 nations. The Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, writes in Derech Hashem that Hashem created the 70 nations, and up to the Dor Haflaga, when Hashem scattered these heads of nations all over the world, basically the human race was undergoing a certain growth process where there's like trees and branches from the tree, and the roots and the trunk, the main part of the tree, were these 70 nations. And up until that period of time, each of these heads of nations, Abram, of course, was the head of the Jewish nation, and there were 70 heads of different nations. So they were all growing to a certain extent and taking on certain character traits. And then at that epoch in history, that period ended, and then Hashem made branches coming from those roots, coming from that trunk of the tree, and the nations came from those heads of families, all of whom kept the characteristics of their parents, of the parent of that nation. So Amalek really comes from Esav. He is a branch of Esav, but he is a dominant force in the nation of Esav, and he is a nation, and that nation still exists, even if they're scattered, even if they're not walking around with a baseball cap saying nation of Amalek on it. There are such people. Maybe they don't know who they are, but they carry those character traits, and they are fulfilling the destiny of that nation. So even if we can't identify them, they do exist, and therefore the mitzvah of the Torah to wipe out Amalek still exists. In theory, if we knew with absolute certainty that somebody came from Amalek and we were able to knock them off and get away with it, then we would have a mitzvah to do so. Maybe we should even say a bracha when we do it. And a Jew who feels squeamish about fulfilling this mitzvah is the one with the problem. Just like some Jews are squeamish about bringing a korban because the idea of slaughtering an animal and having that blood all over the place and burning the meat up on an altar seems very primitive to them. The problem is with these people, not with the mitzvah. We have to get with the program and realize that we are not more enlightened than the Torah. The Torah doesn't change. The mitzvahs don't change. And everything that was relevant and practical back then is just as relevant and practical today. So the nature of Amalek is basically the polar opposite of the Jewish people. The mission of the Jewish people is to bring God's knowledge and God's goodness to the human race. Now, we can best fulfill that in our own land, right? When we are a real nation in our homeland, in a truly Jewish society, then we are able to be a beacon of light to the rest of the world, teaching the world about God's light and God's knowledge. The Gemara says that the Jewish people have three primary character traits by which we can identify somebody as definitely being a Jew: Rachmanim, Baishanim, and Gomlei Chasadim. Jews have a character of mercy. We have a character of shame. We have a conscience. If we do the wrong thing, we feel guilty and bad about it. And we do chesed. We're looking to do kind deeds for others, even if we don't get credit for it or we don't get payment for it. We're just looking to do good simply for the sake of helping other people. A person who doesn't have any of these character traits, even if he identifies as a Jew, maybe we can't say with absolute certainty that he's not Jewish, but there's strong reason to question that and to be doubtful of that, because again, Jews have certain character traits. Even Jews that do sins, that may have other bad character traits, they should at the essence have these three character traits. Amalek is the polar opposite. Amalek exists to fight the Jewish people. The first encounter that we have with Amalek as a nation was shortly after we were freed from slavery and we entered the desert. Shortly after that, Amalek sent a band of soldiers out of their land. We weren't threatening them. We weren't bothering them in any way, to attack us out of the blue for no clear reason, because we were starting to form and grow as a nation, and they wanted to destroy us at the very roots. Amalek is fighting a war against God, and since Amalek can't fight God, he fights a proxy war by attacking us. Because if there is no Jewish people, God forbid, then God's presence would not be manifest in the world. There would be nobody to teach the world about God. So since Amalek and our other enemies cannot fight God directly because he is in heaven and he is invincible, so they fight God's ambassadors instead. So our first encounter with Amalek was just that. They were trying to wipe us out. They are the very essence of evil. And from that time, and Amalek, by attacking us, even though they lost the war, Rashi from the Talmud tells us, even though they lost the war, they still achieved a victory and they still accomplished their mission. Because deep down, they knew that they would not be able to wipe out the entire Jewish people, but the nations of the world, after seeing and hearing about all of the miracles, the makos that happened in Egypt, they were terrified to start off with the Jews. We were untouchable. There was an aura surrounding us, and the nations were living in fear of us. Amalek, by attacking us, even though they lost, they say that it was like cooling a hot bath, that the water was boiling hot and they stepped into the bath first. So they got scorched by the boiling water, but they cooled off the water for everybody else. And people say, well, maybe Amalek knows something that we don't. Maybe Amalek knows that the Jews are not really invincible, that it is possible to attack them. Maybe they figured something out, even though they didn't win the war, but they caused damage to the Jewish people and they took something of our aura away from us. So they opened up the door for all the other nations to attack us. And that is, in fact, one of the MOs of Amalek. They don't always directly attack us. In fact, most of the time throughout history, they're not the ones mainly attacking us, but they are trying to get the other nations of the world who might hate us deep down, or even if they don't, they might be neutral towards us, but they try to turn the nations of the world against us to do their dirty work for us. Okay, so they get neutral people to turn into bad people. We try to get neutral people to turn into good people by teaching them the Torah, teaching them the 7 laws of Noah, teaching them about Hashem. They try to take neutral people and turn them into bad people. So they are the polar opposite of the Jewish people. Now within us as well, we also have the Erev, as everybody knows. The Erev are foreigners who have infiltrated the Jewish people. They can come from different sources. They could be converts that have gone bad. They could be false converts. They could be people that intermarried and got mixed up in the nation. Basically, they are moles living among the Jewish people. And it's very difficult, of course, to identify with certainty who is an Erev Rav and who is actually an authentic Jew who has gone bad and maybe will hopefully do tshuva someday. But the bottom line is that we have enemies from without that are led and inspired by Amalek, and we have enemies from within that are generally referred to as the Erev Rav. And I would say, this is my own Hamitosh, I would say that what the Erev Rav is to us, which is moles within the Jewish people, trying to undermine us and weaken us and do battle against us from the inside, Amalek is to the other nations of the world. They're like an Erev Rav mixed up among the nations of the world, trying to bring down their downfall, trying to get them to do evil things as well. So there is an eternal war against Amalek. Of course, the Torah says at the end of Parshas Shalach, when Amalek first attacked us, that there was a war between God and Amalek, dar in all times. Now that war is also a mitzvah upon us. Ultimately, Hashem will directly and indirectly destroy Amalek. He'll bring us Mashiach, and he will lead the physical war against Amalek to destroy him. But we have our own share in that war as well, as I will discuss shortly. Now, just one other small proof, although proof isn't really necessary, that Amalek is a real nation. Bilam, at the end of his prophecies, he prophesied about the different nations of the world, and he prophesied very clearly about Amalek. He says, Reshis goyim Amalek, va'achariso adei oved, that Amalek is among the first of the nations. He's ahead, he's very powerful, but in the end, he will be utterly destroyed. Short and sweet and very straight to the point. There's no doubt about the meaning of that prophecy, that there is a real nation and it's going to be destroyed. Now, another important point to bring up is that it is our mitzvah to destroy Amalek. There are righteous Gentiles in the world who want to help the Jews in moving forward. And it's great that they want to do that, but it's not their mitzvah to destroy Amalek. It is our mitzvah to destroy Amalek. The nations of the world have 7 mitzvahs, and destroying Amalek is not one of them per se, although certainly one of their mitzvahs is ensuring that the other laws of Noah are kept, and Amalek violates all of them. So I guess in principle, if they do establish a court system to enforce the laws of Noah, then in that sense, they would maybe prosecute Amalek. But in terms of wiping out the nation, that is really the war of Hashem, and it's a mitzvah for the Jews. It's not a mitzvah for the nations per se. Now again, how do we identify Amalek per se? Now I said that the character traits of the Jews are Rahmanim, Baishanim, and Gomlet Hasadim. The character traits of Amalek, I would say there's really 2 of them that stand out. One of them is trying to erode people's moral conscience. This is the MO of Amalek. Every human being has good and bad, right? The Torah says that the nature of all people is bad, but we also have a soul that comes from heaven, which is good. right? So the physical aspects of people trying to drag us down to the dirt, to the earth from which we came, where the soul is trying to elevate us and raise us to heaven. And that's the constant tension in a person, is trying to live in a physical world with a physical body, but have the soul and elevate the body to always be serving Hashem. So we have good and bad. All people have the good and bad in the side of them. Now, Amalek tries to tell people doing bad is actually doing good. Going against moral principles, going against the Torah, going against nature is actually progress. It's enlightenment. It's moral. Following the Torah is primitive and cruel and hateful and evil. That is the standard tactic of Amalek. There, of course, is plenty of examples from modern times. Don't need to give a whole lecture about that. Everybody knows. But that is the MO of Amalek, casting doubts in people's minds. And it's very, very sinister what they do. Because we think, well, of course, I'm going to keep the Torah. I'm a frum Jew. I'm not going to do these crazy things that Amalek is telling us to do. But it's very, very sinister how they wear people down. They get people to start cutting corners, to lose their spine, to lose their toughness, to lose their determination to do Hashem's will. That is the way Amalek starts to drag people down. It doesn't happen in one shot. It happens very, very slowly initially. And that is also the tactic of the Erev. The Erev are the ones who got the Jews to serve the golden calf, right? They said, Moshe is gone. He's never coming back. And we need a leader. And we need a way to connect to Hashem without Moshe. So go serve the golden calf. They didn't say, let's go serve idol worship and make a big party. But they tried to frame it as being a mitzvah, as being a good thing. And of course, they dragged down many Jews because of that. That is a tactic of the Erev. And it all comes from Amalek. So when you see people trying to wear down people's morals, trying to turn good into bad and bad into good, to justify horrible acts as being praiseworthy, like killing babies or killing the elderly, or saying some people's lives are worth more than other people's lives, making these moral calculations that people shouldn't be making, that is all the MO of Amalek. That will eventually lead people to committing atrocities that they would not be capable of otherwise. That is taking decent people who have a sense of goodness and turning them into evil people. That's exactly what the Nazis did, and that is what Amalek is doing today. They're taking decent moral people and twisting their morals around to turn them into cruel, horrible people, which leads into the second character trait of Amalek, is that they are cruel, cold killers. Okay, they have no conscience, they have no morals, they have no guilt. Jews, as I said, have a sense of shame and a sense of mercy. Amalek has no mercy. Amalek has no shame. Amalek is proud of what they do, and they are clinical, cold killers. When you hear stories about people in the hospital who are going there as COVID patients or pre-assumed COVID patients, they were isolated, and many of them were starved to death. They weren't treated properly by the hospital staff. So we hear, well, the hospital staff was overwhelmed. They couldn't care for everybody. If the hospital staff is overwhelmed and they can't care for everybody, then they should make a public call with tears streaming down their face. Please send us backup. Please send us more people to help us. But unfortunately, many of these doctors, many of these nurses were cruel and cold and clinical, and that's why the patients had to be isolated. I would say anybody who could knowingly inject somebody with poison, knowing that it's dangerous, even if they don't know the full extent of the dangers and the risks, but knowing how dangerous it could be, and knowing how ignorant most people are when they come to get injected with this, and they do it cruelly and coldly because that's their job. They're following orders. This is what they have to do, and they have no emotion. They have no guilt. That is a sign either that they are Amalek or that they've been overtaken by Amalek's influence. That is their calling card. Again, it doesn't matter so much if somebody is Amalek or they've been taken over by their influence. The outcome of their actions is going to be the same. Okay, so when we see people like Klaus Schwab, without an ounce of emotion, without an ounce of guilt or concern or conscience for the damage that they cause to people, again, they're framing all of their actions as protecting the human race and saving lives. But along the way, they are destroying so many lives, and they have no conscience and they have no guilt about that. Those are cruel, cold people. And I would say most likely the leaders of the people in power would be Amalek, and the people below them carrying out the orders are most likely those who have been influenced and overtaken by Amalek. People on the bottom can hopefully potentially do tshuva. People on the top must be destroyed because they come from Amalek. As I alluded to before, it's no coincidence that the war on the human race and the war on truth, with these poisons and COVID and the masks, and restrictions, and all the craziness that we've seen, coincides exactly with the war on gender, which has been taken to new and extreme levels like never before. And they're accelerating this and pushing this like never before, as if the world doesn't have enough problems and people don't have enough to worry about. This has to be foremost on everybody's minds. Gay parades and transgender parades and children wanting to change their gender and big companies going all in on this and celebrating it and making it out to be the greatest thing in the world. This is the calling card of Amalek, wearing down people's morals and especially going after the weak. As it says in Parshas Kiseitze, which we read in Parshas Zachar, what did Amalek do when they attacked the Jews? They didn't go after the warriors. They didn't go after the young, strong men in armor. They went after the stragglers. They went after the weak people that were straggling after the Jewish nation, the people that weren't so strong. That's what Amalek does today. They go after the elderly. They go after the children. Who were the first people to get poisoned? It was the elderly. Who are they going after harder to poison more than anybody else? They're going after the children who need it. Even assuming that this poison wasn't the poison, but who needs it less than anybody else? It's children who aren't in any danger whatsoever. The best thing that you could do to your child is actually expose him to somebody who has COVID on purpose because it won't harm them, and then they'll have natural immunity. There is no excuse whatsoever to be injecting them with anything. And who is Amalek and his henchmen going after more urgently than anybody else? It's the children, the weak, and the defenseless, the people who can't stand up for themselves, the people who can't fight. That's who Amalek goes after. Just like back then, they went after the stragglers. Today, they're going after the elderly and the children. And eventually, of course, they want to go after everybody as well. So once people understand this and they understand the nature of Amalek, then the mitzvah to destroy Amalek is very easy for us to understand. The gay people themselves, people who are homosexuals, who have such urges, shouldn't be angry at those who keep the Torah. They should be waging war against Amalek themselves. They should be rising up against the gay activists who are urging them on. Because these people, many of them were victims of child abuse or trauma, and that's why they're going against nature now. This is a fact. This is a medical fact. And in fact, homosexuality was officially a mental illness until gay activists pressured the mental illness associations to take it off the books. But it is a mental illness. These are people who are unfortunate. These are victims. These are people that we should feel sorry for and be trying to help. Torah Jews have always been reaching out to such people, urging them to do tshuva, offering them help in any way that we can. We're actually their greatest friends. Amalek is trying to destroy their bodies and souls. So these are victims of Amalek. It's no surprise, therefore, that Amalek is going after them. The gay activists, the people leading the charge, most likely come from Amalek. The average gay person on the street, or the average gay person that may still be in the closet, is probably a victim more than anything else. If people understood what Amalek is and how they're playing with people's minds and making a war on truth and pulling people's strings, they would understand the imperative to wage a war on Amalek. And even if they couldn't physically do it, they would dive into Hashem with all their heart and soul every single day, as I do, to utterly take away their power, Amalek and the Erev, and to utterly destroy them. I daven for this every single morning, and everybody should daven for this as well. Because again, if we can't physically wage the war, spiritually, we have to fight this war. It's very good. I'm not the only rabbi speaking about this today. I just heard a shir earlier today from Rabbi Alon Anava, who has a lot of followers in Israel. He gave a lengthy shir also about Amalek and the Erev, and other rabbis have been doing this as well. I don't remember it being such a popular topic for people to speak about openly as it has become in recent times. I'm very glad that the topic of Amalek in practical terms has become a more popular topic. There's greater awareness of this. There's greater interest in it. And I think that that's a very positive sign that people are waking up to the existence of this evil nation, the imperative and the mitzvah to wage war against this evil nation, and to daven to Hashem to assist us and to utterly wipe them out. I think it's wonderful that this is starting to happen. Hopefully the next time I give a Dvar Torah and Shul about Amalek, everybody will say more and more, please give us more, teach us about this mitzvah, as we are doing today. Amalek wages a war on truth, as I mentioned earlier. All of those who are engaging in censorship, as Lowell mentioned earlier, the big tech companies, the mass media, the government that they actually work for, they don't work for us. They're all paid off by the government and by the big companies, that they don't allow people to actually argue topics, to present both sides of the topic. That is a war on truth. That is, again, the calling card of Amalek. Even in the Orthodox world, I've been very outspoken in saying that I think most rabbis today, certainly the ones that have been speaking out, are Erev Rav. They may be Torah scholars, but people who assimilate into the Jewish nation can also grow a beard, can also open a book, can also learn Torah. So that doesn't mean that they are, in essence, not Erev Rav. It's very, very doubtful that rabbis who are coldly and cruelly calling people who don't poison themselves murderers and criminals and urging them to be isolated from society without tears streaming down their faces, it's very hard to believe that these are actually Jewish people, and they're shutting down any discussion on the matter. Rabbis in the olden days, the way it should work is when there's a new question, then rabbis should get together and people should join the rabbis, and we should all hash it out. We should all present the Torah sources, pro and con, hash out all the different sides of the issue, and then try to decide what is the Torah perspective on everything. But these rabbis are actually in favor of censorship, of silencing people, shutting people down, shutting off all voices of opposition to this. That is not the Torah way. That is the Erev Rav. That is the Erev Rav way. That is the way of Amalek. Shlomo HaMelech said in Koheles, the wisest king, the wisest man who ever lived, he said there is a time to love and there is a time to hate, right? It's very popular today in the Western liberal world in which Amalek thrives to say that hatred is terrible, that anybody who has hatred for anything is a racist, a bigot, a sexist, a homophobe. They have all these names that they smear people with, and they make a war on hate. Well, Shlomo HaMelech said that there is a time to love and a time to hate. Now, again, we shouldn't be walking around with rage, bloodthirsty, trying to kill people. That's not the way we are, but there is a time to hate. And we have to hate people that are waging war on God and waging war on truth and waging war on the Torah and trying to get good people to do evil things and convince them that this is a mitzvah. We are supposed to hate these things. God hates them, and we are supposed to hate them as well. It is virtuous to hate people who are evildoers and are encouraging other people to do evil. It is against the Torah to not hate such people. Again, it doesn't mean that we're looking to commit acts of violence necessarily, or that we're looking to, be bloodthirsty people, but we have to hate those that are enemies of Hashem. That is our purpose. And in fact, it's ironic that is the way of Amalek, telling people that hatred is bad. Hatred is not good or bad. Hatred is simply an emotion or a feeling that we have for something. And if something is evil, then we should hate it. So it's a calling card of Amalek to tell us all hatred is bad. Again, it's twisting people's morals around and confusing people to make his job easier. Somebody asked me in the questions, and I'd like to get the questions shortly. What is our job, in facing Amalek? How can we protect ourselves and our children from Amalek and the war on truth? I would say very simply, our job is not to allow ourselves to be manipulated by media, by rabbis, by governments, by authority figures, by advertising, by anybody. We have to be careful thinkers. We certainly should not make decisions, especially decisions that have life and death and health implications, on spur of the moment based on emotions or feelings. I think the primary reason why they've been pushing a steady diet of fear and pressure and restrictions for the last year and a half or so is to wear people down and make them afraid and make them incapable of making rational, careful, clear-minded decisions when it comes to taking an injection or accepting or not complying with the latest edicts of the government. They want people to make the decisions based on feelings and based on emotions and not based on careful, rational thought. I find it hard to believe that anybody who is unbiased and neutral and hasn't yet made up their mind about the injections, if you present them both sides of the story. I wrote an article, 31 Reasons Why I Personally Was Not Going to Get Vaccinated. There have been similar pieces as well that others have written. And I'd like somebody to write an article, 31 Reasons Why I Will Take the Vaccine. And let's go to somebody who hasn't yet made up his mind with equal time. Let them share their reasons why you should get vaccinated, and I'll share, and others can share the reasons why you shouldn't get vaccinated. I find it hard to believe that anybody who has not yet made up their mind would hear out both sides, and without any personal vested interest or blackmail involved, of course, people are taking it because they're being blackmailed, would choose to take this injection and say, you know what, I think that this is a great idea. This is good for my health. This is a drug or a chemical cocktail that I want in my body. I think it's fantastic and the right thing to do. I think very, very few people would do that. People are choosing it only because they are being tricked by Amalek and because they're being blackmailed. They want to be able to travel. They want to be able to spend time with other people and so on and so forth. So it's very, very important to not allow yourself to make decisions based on feelings or based on emotions or based on fear or pressure. Sit down calmly, rationally, and think to yourself, and then and only then make a decision. Certainly don't allow people to blackmail you into doing anything. Now, I'll close with one final point. I think it's very important as well to not get sucked down a rabbit hole of worrying too much about the metaphysical aspects of Amalek and the Erev, the Kabbalistic aspects. Other rabbis talk about it, and it's certainly good. I don't, for two reasons. First of all, because I don't think it's helpful in practical terms for most people. And second of all, because I'm really ignorant of that. I've seen some sources here and there, but I don't study Kabbalistic sources. What I've seen, I don't really understand. If I understand anything, it's only on a very, very shallow level. So I don't talk about that. And I don't think it's helpful for people to get sucked into what's going on in the heavenly spheres and what's going to happen today, tomorrow, the next day. What are the evil guys thinking? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? I guess it's fun on a certain level, and it's good to be conscious of what's going on, but there are certain limits to it. If people get sucked into talking about it and worrying about it and posting about it all day long, they're losing sight of their purpose. Their purpose is to be a foot soldier in God's army. That is to do mitzvahs, that is to help people, that is to strengthen people, that is to encourage everybody they know to not poison themselves, to educate people about the Torah way, about the true science. And every minute that they're spending talking about what Amalek is really thinking and why they're really doing this and what they may be plotting next is one less minute that they could spend possibly influencing somebody and strengthening somebody, which is what Amalek is doing with all their propaganda, right? They're using their propaganda, again, to turn people who haven't made up their minds, who are neutral, who have good and bad fighting inside them, trying to get them to be their henchmen and do bad. They're doing this propaganda because it works, and they're censoring us because what we say also works. So we have to spend our time, it's not propaganda, but spreading the truth to counter Amalek as much as possible and literally save people's lives, physically and spiritually. So don't get sucked into the rabbit hole. Spend your time being a foot soldier for God, however you can, with any talents or gifts that God gave you. I have writing gifts. Other people have other gifts. Use those gifts to save people's lives and help them. Anybody who has children or knows people who have children, don't you dare allow them to touch the children, especially. Don't let them touch the children, no matter what. If children need to find another school, find another school. If you have to find another job or another place to live, or if you have to suffer every which way, don't let them touch the children. That's the end of my presentation. I'm happy